Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. And wherever you are in this wide, wonderful, beautiful world we live in, you are very welcome to the Global Sales Leader Podcast. I am your host, Jason Cooper. I'm the sales relationship coach. The reason why I call myself the sales relationship coach, because I believe in sales, it's all about that relationship. You can have the core skills, you can have other things around them, but if you don't have the rapport, if you don't have those integral relationships with your clients and how you can grow your clients from the initiation point to where it actually could go as a trusted advisor, and that's where we need to be in sales. There are lots of other facets around that, but I speak to phenomenal leaders from around the globe, areas of expertise. And the whole idea of this podcast is to give back some golden nuggets of knowledge, information, so we can all share and grow with this. And I know you're going to learn from my guest today. You are very welcome to my good friend, Gareth Chick. Welcome.
Hi, Jason. Good to see you.
How are you?
I love the way you pronounce my name, by the way. It's just beautiful, Chic, like that. It's just.
It reminds me of Nile Rodgers and Chic, so that's why.
A great hero of mine, Nile Rodgers. Yeah, classic.
He's one of mine as well. I've seen him several times, so he's also very good. A little bit of synopsis about you, because it's not about me today. Well, it was a little bit about me, but Gareth is an outstanding track record as a CFO and a CEO and chairman of both public and private companies, including lots and lots of different facets. And I'm sure Gareth will give a good synopsis of that. He's worked for senior executives in the area of leadership for Fortune 500 companies. Gareth is knowledge expert of corporate cultures, corporate psychology, which is an area of fascination for me, because that's the area that I love as well, how people think and how people do things, and especially when it comes to success and leadership and cultural change. And how I know Gareth is I'm doing some stuff with Google at the moment, and that's how I met Gareth, because he's doing some leadership and he's doing some Google coaching as well. So it's phenomenal what he does. So Gareth, look, I've given some touch points to you. Now it's time for you to tell me, what are the anchor points along the way to where you are now? Big question, I know that.
I do apologise, Mike. I suppose, so just a few anchor points along the way, I guess. Well, bizarrely, I think I knew at the age of 9 that I wanted to go into business. I got my first paid work, working in a farmer's field, clearing ragwort for a few pennies an hour. And I really enjoyed the exchange of money for my skill. And my first negotiation with an employer, after about 4 weekends of working, I realized I was getting faster and faster because I was picking up skill. So I just thought I would actually be deserving of a bit more money. The farmer didn't see it that way, so I quit. My dream job at 12, and don't worry, Jason, this is a short story. My dream job at 12 was working in the greengrocers. I loved the retail theatre that the greengrocer created. I think I'm a salesman sort of naturally by heart. I watched him. He would sort of be very charming to the mostly female housewives in those days. This is the sort of early 60s. And I wanted to have that skill of twirling the bag and loading the potatoes. And I plagued him. He finally gave me a job when I was 12. Still one of the greatest jobs I've ever had. And in my teenage years, I got inspired by what was one of the new generation of people coming in to run grammar schools at that time. This was an ex-businessman, Oliver Jenks. And he really ignited my passion for business. He gave me advice to train as an accountant and go into general management. That's what I did. And I was incredibly driven in my 20s. I was a CFO of a public company at the age of 27. So I had very good, good success very early on. I was very charming. I was quite controlling. I learned how to manipulate people and use the power and control that I got. And I was very arrogant. And I got sent on a leadership course when I was 28 by my CEO at the time. I was so resentful of the fact that he thought I needed to go on a course. I didn't behave particularly well on the first morning of the program. I looked around and I thought, why am I here? I was dreadfully arrogant in those days. And luckily, the leader of the course, Walter Blackburn, took me to one side and gave me one of my very first sort of tough pieces of feedback. And I really respected him. So I stayed, I threw myself in. It was a transformational experience. I was so inspired. I mean, the language of business, this is 37 years ago. So the language of business was slightly different. We didn't talk about emotional intelligence. We didn't talk about coaching, but that's what I really got from that program. And I was so inspired by it that I asked if it was an American training organization. I asked if I could become a trainer in my spare time. And that's what I did. And I ran companies then through to the age of about 42. So I was a CEO for 12 years, but my hobby was running leadership classes. And what I noticed that I was bringing not just the sort of theoretical base that I'd been taught by the training company, but I was coming out of a very pressured job, and I was really teaching people how to coach under pressure. And I started developing my own material. When I stepped down from Pendragon, been running a PLC for a couple of years. When I stepped down from Pendragon, I took a life decision. I was 42. I'd been leading Pendragon for 2 years. I describe it as both the best and the worst job I've ever had. It was a glorious job. I loved it. It was leading from the front 7 days a week, 250 outlets around the country. But I was very close to burning out, and I was going through a separation of my first marriage. And my children were 14 and 15 years old. And so I had this great plan. I'm going to take 2 years off. Sort myself out a bit, make sure Steph and Tom are okay, spend lots of time with them, and then I'll go and run another big company. Life had a different path for me. I think God laughed at my plans, as the saying goes. And I got very busy doing consulting work because I had this network of people who knew me as a coach and a trainer. And I really enjoyed it. I felt it was, there was no pressure to it, no stress. I enjoyed it. I loved the variety. And then I got offered 2 chairman's jobs, literally in the same week. One was private equity, a software business that was, had obvious attractions. And one was social housing, the UK's first tenant-led housing association, which was brilliant. I chaired both of those organizations for 7 or 8 years. And that was my turning point of never returning to be a chief exec. And I've been very blessed for the last 23 years. I've had a wonderful life. I've written a lot about coaching. I've developed my own coaching material. I've written a couple of books. I've coached a lot of people. I've been fortunate to go all around the world. And here I am at 65 years old, 43 years after I first managed people, still as evangelistic and passionate as ever. And it's thank you for inviting me on to talk about some stuff with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's really good. I love the accolade that you've given. So we know that the world has changed over the last 10 years and lots of different technologies have come in and out. But coaching performance, I'm fascinated by coaching, but I'm also fascinated by the neuroscience of how people work and how people operate. But to get the very best out of people, what's a really good way of getting absolutely best out of high performance? Because we are talking about high performance now in the market. It's a bit of a buzzword or whatever, but how do we do that successfully, especially for leaders? And because this is the Global Sales Leader Podcast, we have to make it a little bit more specific towards sales.
Well, the key, I believe, is an understanding of what I call our unconscious controlling habits, ouch for short, which if I think I'm very proud of, the development of that methodology. And I think what happens is managers, because they work under constant pressure and constant stresses of expectations and competition, managers become very controlling and quite manipulative, completely unconsciously. And that isn't the style that's going to get the best out of people. In fact, it becomes completely counterproductive. So I think, and most of the work that I do is based on really what we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes, this fundamental understanding of the difference between when we're operating in our neocortex and when we're operating in our survival brain. And because of the constant, persistent, sort of low-level pressure that managers work under, that everybody in a corporate world works under, we're mostly using our survival brain, most of the day, without really realizing. We think we're sort of consciously in control of things, but actually we're pretty much on sort of conditioned responses and autopilot most of the time. And the survival brain, of course, is driven mostly by threat. And so it's very hypersensitive to potential threats. Well, 100,000 years ago, the threat might have been a mammoth or an idiot in the cave next door with a club. Now, the threat might simply be an email that we read with a title, or the name of the person. It might be we go into a meeting and our boss just raises a quite a judgmental, or what feels like a judgmental eyebrow at one point. These moments can be quite wounding, and they come thick and fast. And so you cannot get the best out of somebody if they're operating from their survival brain. All you can get is conditioned responses in crises and urgencies. But if you really want to get the best out of people, you have to be the agent that brings them into a space where they're free to use their neocortex. The neocortex is the place where they can think calmly and deeply and rationally and logically. But it is also the place where we hold our higher moral values, our personal core values, or the values of the organization. So what the neocortex is able to do is take a calm moment, really analyze a situation and a problem without thinking, from ego terms, how am I going to look if this goes wrong, or how am I going to look if this goes right? Really consider what's the logical thing to do, and then balance that with, but what's the right thing to do here? And I think if managers did more of the right things than the things that might seem logical, or the things they believe they will get rewarded by, or indeed a lack of punishment for, wouldn't this world be a different place? And that's a lot about what I've written about, when you mentioned corporate psychology earlier on. Why is it that fundamentally honest, decent, moral people come to behave in quite aberrant ways when they're in a position of power and control over other people?
Yeah, and we've probably seen that in the governments of our time as well, where people's egos take control of themselves. And the thing I was thinking about is that space, that time to think, because the pressures that are on these managers and these salespeople to hit their targets. But what time do they need to take stock and just think about things and pause for a moment, maybe taking time out of their day just to reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, rather than just drive. So what do you think is I know we spoke about the ouch methodology and we spoke about that, but what is a good strategy for people just to think?
Well, in all the training courses I've ever run, I tend to finish by asking the participants, or rather by telling the participants, look, there is a lesson I do not want you to take away. I do not want you to take away that you have to spend more time doing the things we've talked about. Because if that is the lesson you learn, you'll never do it. It's not really about time, it's about intent. And what I teach people to do, I teach managers to do, is to create that moment of calm opportunistically, and hold it for 2 minutes. It's not about, I mean, it's lovely if you've got the time to take somebody into a calm room for 30 minutes and calm everything down. Of course, you can do some great coaching and they can do some great thinking. But the real trick is to be opportunistic and then to build that into the cultural way that you operate. So many people are fearful of their manager's reaction that the manager almost doesn't stand a chance anyway, because if I think that you're going to react, I will bring a rather defensive energy in with me.
Yeah.
You can't coach me when I'm in that space. And managers need to be aware in the moment of how people are, what state they're in, and be ready to exercise their own. So this is why the emotional intelligence is critical. This is why self-awareness and self-regulation is the absolute key to this. If I'm not self-aware, if I have no ability to self-regulate, I'm simply going to meet your insecurity and that will trigger an insecurity in me. And I'm likely then to tell you what to do or to seek to control you or ask you, clattering closed questions or make loads of statements and think that that's going to get the job done. So I think that time, I'm a great believer in the sanctity of the one-to-one. I say to managers, look, it's, have a rhythm, half-hour one-to-one once a week, a 1 hour team meeting once a week, huddles or all hands. And when you set these up, think about this. You could create, if you've got 160, if you've got 200, however many working hours in a month, put 5 hours aside. If you've got 8 people, put 20 hours aside just to do and religiously hold the structure so that person knows I've got my one-to-one on Friday. Okay, I've got half an hour, which is just for me. Create that half an hour. But unfortunately, of course, managers do they get seduced into the pressure of, well, I'm very busy at the moment. And, it's hard for managers. This goes to their sense of self-worth. If I look calm all the time, if I can ask you great questions and I'm a great listener, people are going to look at me and say, well, you're not doing very much, are you? And you haven't really got a sense of urgency around you. Yeah. So the system is it's so easy for people to get seduced into being the type of sort of manager that actually they don't really want to be, but is also counterproductive. So for me, it's around the structures that we use around one-to-ones, team meetings. Yeah, of course, be mindful, practice yoga. I mean, those things are wonderful, but they cannot become the solution that we give busy people. What we need to give busy people is tools that they can use every minute opportunistically.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because everyone's saying, oh, I'll go to do a meditation now. That'll sort you out. But really, does that really sort me out? I'm different to my friend John down there, and they're different to that, and they're different to that. So it's really understanding yourself, which does come with emotional intelligence. And I think emotional intelligence is knowing yourself, but I think that takes time to really know yourself. So all these new managers that are coming out and sales are being pressured down, it does take a little bit of time to really understand you and knowing yourself, what works well for you. Some people are visual, auditory, kinesthetic. We all learn in different ways. So how do we do that to make sure that we're all connected in the right way that works with us? And I think that's part and parcel of that. So how do we connect with people better? And how can we make sure that's continuous in growth of ourselves, but also other people?
Well, I mean, I think you're talking there about how we create a culture whereby people will do the right things, where they will use discretionary effort when they're not being supervised, where they'll do the right things, even if nobody's looking. Of course, the corporate world, it can frequently feel to people as though, what's the point in me solving a problem if nobody's watching? Yeah. I'm not going to get any credit for it. We have to create the cultures where we do notice what people are doing. I talk a lot to managers about, how do you observe your direct reports going about their daily work? How do you catch them doing things right? How do you give them the praise? You might say, well, they're just doing their job, but actually just doing a job these days means doing it to the fullest extent. So look out for things. That connection then really comes from how we build the connections between people as well. And what I see managers who act as what I call, they act as the hub of the wheel, and everything comes through them. Somebody comes to them and says, I've got a real problem, I can't work with this other guy, can you have a word with them? And they go, oh, right, okay, and off they go. I mean, it's fatal. Rather than coaching people to build their own relationships, so pushing that out to the perimeter of the wheel and getting everybody to support each other, which is why team meetings are so vitally important. But a team meeting shouldn't just be a series of one-way conversations. As a leader, I need to facilitate that conversation out. And I think we build cultures. Yes, we can have fine and noble intentions, and it's very important that we're able to set a real mission that has purpose and meaning to it for people, and a set of sort of values that we ask people. But actually, that's the easy part. The hard part is translating those intentions into the reality of what actually happens on the ground. And the only way I know how to do that is to have these, what I call these structures, which are mostly around people. So a structure to me is a plan, a budget, a one-to-one, a team meeting, a performance appraisal meeting, how we induct people into the company. These structures are the way that we deliver the authenticity of our culture. And then what happens, of course, is lots of random things happen. We get results and we get outputs. And then it's about how do we reward the desired behaviors that we see around us, and how do we give consequences to the undesired behaviors? Because if there's no consequence, feedback, and the only way people are ever going to take feedback is if they're in their neocortex. The neocortex.
Question I want to ask you on that, Gareth, and it's quite important, I think, is motivations. You got that intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, but the people that are not performing that well, especially sales professionals, what are the right ways of getting them out of where they actually are and get them back into performing well? Because we know there's lots of things that could be happening in the background, lack of sleep. There could be stuff that's happening at the home or whatever it might be. But how can we make sure that they're back in motivated by how they're motivated? Because it's all about them. As I say, their intrinsic, extrinsic motivations, but getting the managers to work with that to help them back on track, because that's a really key core skill to actually have.
Well, of course, the issue that we have in sales is it's a competitive environment.
It is, yeah.
And we attract people who have a competitive, streak in them. They enjoy that chasing of targets. They enjoy the measurement process towards a target. They enjoy the fact that there may be league tables, or they can hold themselves up against others. But of course, that in the hands of managers who are lacking some self-awareness, or don't realize that can spill over into aggression. It can spill over into people burning out through the stress and the personal expectation they will put on themselves. So I think target setting is an incredibly important. And I've seen people in the past set targets, almost deliberately beyond the point where there's any real sense of realism to them. And so you're fighting the whole time against an expectation that is unrealistic. And the biggest stress of any in the corporate world is unrealistic expectations. Yeah. Now, of course, leaders will say, well, if I don't, if I ask people to set their targets themselves, they'll lowball it, and they'll, I need to stretch people. I can see the potential in them. And even if they, you hear all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But this is the art of being a manager of a sales team, is knowing how to set agree and set the targets. It's then knowing how to monitor people against those targets and knowing how to manage the expectations. And of course, the management of expectations then becomes through the system of forecasting. And I've always said, I've gone into many organizations as a consultant, and I've always said, show me the way the company does the forecast, and I can tell you everything I need to know about that culture. I'll tell you if it's run by fear. I took over a company a few years ago as a chair, and it was a real turnaround situation. So I had to be quite hands-on. And what I heard about the forecasts, and I won't name the CFO at the time. CFO was a very strong character, and what people would tell me is, well, if you ask me what I think the number is going to be, I think it's going to be X. But I can tell you now, that number isn't going to be good enough for so and so. So the whole of the forecasting in this company was done on the basis of hope. And so you also have to have a very strong sort of radar up, a sensitivity. It's a constant balancing act, getting the targets right, getting the forecast right, and then knowing at what point in the year that the forecast becomes your commitment. So I've run this rhythm many times in organizations. You start the year, you do a sort of reforecast a couple of times, and then at some point that forecast becomes the commitment of the person to hit that number. These are the sort of arts and crafts, if you like, of the sales manager in particular. Not easy. Takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of human awareness. You mentioned earlier people's learning styles. You have to know your individual salespeople. You have to know what drives them. You have to know how to motivate them, or rather the conditions that you can bring as a manager in order to motivate them to perform at their best. But that's, for me, what is lovely about the job. Some sales managers don't want that level of to have to exercise that level of care, and so they fall back on the performance management systems, they fall back on incentive schemes, and they basically subcontract the control of salespeople out to promotions, performance appraisals, ratings, and commissions.
Based on that's really excellent. What I'm really fascinated by, Gareth, and a couple more moments of your precious time, is from your years of experience, what are the behaviors and attitudes that you've seen that drive success? And I'm looking at behaviors and attitudes.
Number one, the ability to receive clear feedback without getting defensive, without overreacting. Now, and this is why we have to have people in their neocortex. The neocortex thrives on feedback. It's the only way that it learns. It tries something out, it goes wrong, it goes well, they learn about it, they iterate. That's how the neocortex learns, and it's how we learn every single skill. Constant practice and iterations of learning. And so for me, it's self-confidence, self-esteem, self-awareness. So when I work with sales managers and when I work with salespeople, what I'm really doing is working on their self-confidence and their sense of self. Because if they have a strong sense of self-awareness, then they will be much more open to feedback. If they're open to feedback, you can teach people, a lot of things. You can direct people to take advice and try things out in client meetings without fear. But if they are not open to feedback, if their insecurity gets the better of them, it's really, really hard. Now, I've been told over the years, some of the best sales people I know, they live on the edge. They've got a whacking great mortgage. They're scared every single day they go out. Well, maybe there's some products that you can sell like that. I really passionately don't believe that's. I think the best salespeople are trustworthy, they're relationship builders, they're passionate about their product and their company, rightly so. They don't get defensive, if they get a criticism. They don't get insecure if somebody talks about a competitor. They know the landscape, and they know or they can assess what they believe is best for the customer in the long term. Now, some of the best customer relationships I've had, and I learned this very early on. I was CFO of a semiconductor company very early on. We would be selling, a chip for $100 a piece in January and $1 a piece in December. And I knew that the relationship with our distributors was key, because I might have to have a conversation with a distributor at the end of the year where I would say, I'm really, you're going to have to take 100,000 pieces, and they're going to have to be this price. And they'd say, why would I want to do that? Well, because I'm asking you. Yep. And by the way, early next year, remember what I did for you 3 months ago, early next year, but this partnership, this two-way partnership, and salespeople must be proud of their profession. Selling is a wonderful profession. There should be absolutely no shame around the fact that we say, no, I'm a salesman. Yeah. We all do it. We're all purveyors of ideas. We're all trying to influence people, both in our public and private life. And I love salespeople who are proud to say, I'm a salesperson, and I've got a great product, and I'm really good at what I do, and my customers benefit because I sell them more than they thought they originally needed, or something different to what they thought they originally needed. That's a great salesman.
Absolutely. I love that. That was really cool. I love that, because it's all about the way I look at this podcast and in life in general. It's all about golden nuggets of knowledge. And as I say, feedback, you can only learn from yourself by giving yourself feedback and asking others for feedback as well, and taking it on board and learning and growing. It's not personal. It's there to help you. There's no such thing as failure, but only feedback for you. Like, this is the Global Sales Leader podcast. The last question I want to ask you before we finish up today. If you were interviewing you, Gareth, what question would you ask yourself?
I think I'd start with Gareth, you're 65. Why are you still doing it? What would I ask myself second? I think I'd probably ask, where do you most feel like an imposter? Wow. So I quite like questions that get some vulnerability coming from people. So I'll probably start with those two. And if you ask me to answer them now, I categorically refuse.
That was good. They're going to be the thing, the question that I would ask. Because we all feel like an imposter at times. So what do you do to get yourself out of being an imposter, in that imposter syndrome?
Jason, I'll preface this answer by saying that I'm at the end of my corporate career. I'm very fortunate that I have choice.
Yeah.
And so I'm well aware that the answer I'm about to give is not necessarily open to. So first of all, why am I still doing it? I'm completely evangelistic and passionate. I'm very proud of the two books I wrote. They came out, one came out 4 years ago, one came out 3 years ago. And that was a real act of me saying, okay, look, here's what I believe, and I have nothing else to write. So from that point, I sort of felt quite liberated that I could stop pretty much when I wanted to. But I still absolutely love traveling. I love being out with people. So that's why I still do it. Where I think I feel most imposter, I am very careful not to take on work that is not right in my sweet spot.
Awesome.
Because I've had my days of saying yes to things, thinking, oh, that's a nice fee attached to that, and I'll be fine. And then having the stress of thinking, like I can do an okay job, but I'm not the expert in this. So I really try to stick to the things where, I can say I'm an acknowledged expert and I have the credentials and the gravitas around that. I try to stay away from stuff where I would think, no, that would just be my ego wanting to do that, really.
Yeah, that's wisdom, isn't it? So, Gareth, how can before we go any further, your two books. Tell us about your two books, just quickly.
Well, they are really two halves of a complete work. I wrote them separately. I actually wrote the second book first, but then I realized I had to write the first book. The first book is called Corporate Emotional Intelligence, Being Human in a Corporate World. And it is a study of the psychology of corporations. And I introduce in that book the concept of CEQ, Corporate Emotional Intelligence, and of CTSD, Corporate Traumatic Stress Disorder, which I fundamentally believe is a distinct anxiety disorder. And I've had a lot of people engage with it. And I really said, look, I want to give this, and go do your research. And because I passionately believe this is a distinct anxiety disorder and should be recognized as such. The corporate world, of course, will disagree because there's probably class action lawsuits might follow. I think the second one is called And the Leader Is, Transforming Cultures Through CEQ. And the second book is the textbook. This is how you coach. This is how you change and transform cultures. This is how you build high performance teams. This is how you influence people through high performance selling. This is how you lead authentically. I'm very proud of those. They were gut-wrenchingly challenging to write. I like a lot of writers. I have a love-hate relationship with writing, and I will never write another book ever. So but I am very proud of them.
Excellent, and they can both be found on Amazon, and
they can both be found on Amazon
in the description of the podcast show. And you can be found on your website, all the three WCEQ.com. Is that your main website?
That is my main website, yes.
And where else can people find more about?
Well, find me on LinkedIn, but those two places. Find me on LinkedIn or find me at ceq.com, and the rest of the team that support me, and a little bit about what we do at CQ. So,
fantastic! Thank you so much. It's been a gift forward, and that's how I like it to be done. Thank you so much for your time, Gareth. It's been phenomenal as usual, and I love every moment, and I learn so much. So it's awesome like that. So thank you again. You've listened to the Global Sales Leader podcast. Every week, I interview really phenomenal people from around the globe that do something slightly different, add value forward to yourself, to your organization, so we can all share and grow, because I believe it's all about growth. So again, thank you once again, Gareth.
You're most welcome.